Hi, I'm the True Wise Gamer, giving off my vast knowledge so you may understand games a bit better. So, Power Rangers. Power Rangers is a series that I have a lot of connection to. It's been throughout most of my life. Heck, it's what got me into Kamen Rider, a series that I hold in high regard, and so many other Toku stuff that I would have never tried. And so, I thought it would be an interesting idea to make a video about all the games for Power Rangers and Super Sentai. Mostly because I don't think I'll ever be able to do Super Sentai games. I mean, there's not a lot there to begin with, but you know, still be interesting. But before we go into all the games, I kinda want to start off by talking about the creation of Power Rangers, and by extension, Super Sentai. The series was made by Shotaro Ishinomori, a mangaka whose work is very vast. In fact, he actually holds the Guinness World Record of most titles for comics under one author, which is very impressive as he's also was under the tutelage of Osamu Tezuka, one of the godfathers of anime and manga. And a lot of his works are still good to this day, like Cyborg 009. Really well done. I really like that series. The anime is actually pretty good, and the sequel anime is it's okay, but not my thing. While trying to think of new ideas for Kamen Rider, he came up with the idea of a group of Kamen Riders joining together. However, he decided against it later on due to the nature of Kamen Rider being usually a lone rider. This was before the Heisei era, so he decided to rework it and make it its own thing. And that would be later called Mitsu Sentai Go Ranger. And let me tell you, it's a weird series. How is it weird, you ask? Okay, so you're probably thinking, it's gotta be a basic show, right? And you wouldn't be wrong, but it's also incredibly dark, early on. Let me explain. Ishinomori-san is a very dark writer at times. And while the first episode of the show basically has all the team members' old squad dying to Nazis. No, I can't even joke about that. They're literally coded to be Nazis. In fact, the next series has literal ones. I can't even joke about this. And the manga is a different sort of beast in general, which sadly I haven't been able to read due to because a copy isn't online and trying to find an English copy is a little annoying. Just note, it goes through its own sort of plot and it's interesting. And let me tell you, old Super Sentai was a little darker too, in a lot of different ways too, but one of the more notable things is just the amount of death that could happen. Straight up, one of the main characters, Go Yellow, straight up dies. And this does happen periodically throughout the series. Not like all of the characters die at some point, but the point is, it's interesting because it isn't usually a thing that happens, and when it does happen, it's actually very interesting. My point is, Sentai can be all sorts of different things, and can have different ideas around it that just Power Rangers can't do normally. But why mention all of this? Well, simply put, Super Sentai got really popular. Okay, actually this is a little more complicated, let me elaborate. Because we have another player here and we need to really mention him. That being Spider-Man. Yeah, seriously, this is actually all important. I swear on my life, there is actually a big web of connection. If you ever saw the 616 series, and basically one of the first episodes was about Toku Spider-Man. It's a great documentary, and it does a really good job of it, at least getting the basics of what happened with it. To simplify, basically Marvel was trying to puncture into the comics industry of Japan, but it was having a hard time. So they thought of making some more stuff that was more for the Japanese that would help at least get more sales for Spider-Man to happen. And it did pretty well. Actually, there was a side comic that actually had Spider-Man and V3 work together, which is very funny in a lot of ways, but side note, and even some manga for it. Though, for real, do not read this manga in particular unless you want to be sad. I cannot stress this enough. You know how we all joke about Peter Parker's life is non-stop misery? This is just an example. Wow, it got dark real fast. But in any case, the Toku show, Spider-Man, no other title, did really well. It did do a lot, and when it ended, it ended. But it still allowed them to collaborate. So, they collaborated on the next series, Battle Fever J, which basically revived Super Sentai at the time, since for the most part it was a one and done show. And well, they decided, hey, why not connect the two? Though that was later on, but another time. But the more important thing was what it added. You see, Spider-Man Toku added a weird thing. You see, to sell Spider-Man a little more, they decided to add a big mech. Why? You just add random stuff sometimes, it's just how it is. And basically, Super Sentai said, hey, why don't we do the same? And thus, the big robot was introduced to Super Sentai and would become a grand staple throughout the entirety of Super Sentai, which has had its ups and downs depending on which series, but for the most part, it's fine. Now, I know you're asking yourself, what the hell does this have to do with Power Rangers? Just trust me on this, it's more connected than you think. Continuing on, Super Sentai got really popular. Popular enough to at least try to expand it out to other territory, which did not do well enough. It did fine for some series like Sun Vulcan, which I actually enjoy. Sad what happened to Sun Panther, but another time. But that series did hit one person, and that being Haim Saban. See, after a trip in Japan, he saw Bioman. He got inspired and began trying to pitch a show where basically using all the Sentai scenes and then adding in American stuff to pitch it to the USA. However, he didn't get anywhere with a lot of people. However, he did gain success through other series that he produced, like the X-Men cartoon and dubs of certain series. So, with some clout, he began trying to pitch the show again to one person, that being Margaret Loshek. Now, you might be wondering, why is she important? Well, she actually worked on the Spider-Man Toku show. See, I'm connecting it. See, it's all connected. So, thought the series could work. But they had to update the footage since Bioman was a bit old at the time. And they decided to do the current Sentai at the time, Kuryu Sentai Zyuranger. And well, the rest is history. The intro here was mostly there for those who didn't know, and since a lot of people wouldn't likely know all the history behind it, I thought it was important to mention it for the normies. And so with that said, let's actually begin talking about the games. And well, more or less how I'm gonna do this. You see, sadly not every series got a game, so I'm going to have to just kind of gloss over it. For the most part, this series is more me talking about my thoughts and feelings on these series individually, but not too much where I'm not moving on when I have nothing really more to say. Plus again, talking about the games are interesting because of just how they could be. I mean, like, there might be some hidden gems here or there. Though, do know there are going to be some trash. Like, there are some trashy PC games that nobody cares about. I think some people wouldn't want me to talk about them, but I'm not going to mention them. Not one bit. And some of them I'm just not going to be able to play due to other things, which we'll mention them when we mention them. Just know, not going to play all of them. I'll make a quick reference to them and move on. And for the record, we are going to add some Super Sentai games because might as well. And that means we're starting off with Jetman. Jetman is considered by a lot of fans to be a nice series that, while a bit off at times with certain plot lines that are just there, I guess, like being a love triangle that it exists, but it's like, what? That sort of gets dropped as well. But overall, the characters are likable and the story being very engaging, with also just having a great arc with the asshole character who you just can't help but love. I overall do enjoy this series, but it's also a bit overblown. But not so overblown that it's not worth seeing. Quick note on what the plot was. Simple version is, Byram, this guy, has begun invasion of Earth, and through the help of Birdonic energy, yes, seriously, they are able to become the Jetman and defeat them. Look, the connection to the villain, sometimes it's going to be weird. I mean, somehow rescue people are going to fight demons for some reason. But in any case, it was the first series to get a game, so I decided to cover it because why not, and led me to do the other Super Sentai games. And I was pretty shocked that this game was pretty good. Not bad, but, you know, decent. It's a basic action platformer game with the Jetman in it. Like, yeah, you have the full team in it, and basically it's simple enough. Red and black have swords, blue and white have used guns, and Yellow Owl will use the Gauntlet for some reason, even though that seems more like what Black would use since he's a brawler in all shapes and forms. Tangent aside, the levels are super simple enough, but the bosses are a little weird. Basically, you use the Icarus, the mecha of the show, to fight the enemies. Sounds simple enough, but it's like a fighting game for some reason at that moment. I'm not sure why it was annoying at first, but once you realize how it works, it's simple enough. Just dodge and block out until you can use your special moves. That's it. It's only 6 levels, but it's overall still decent enough. Like, if you want to play it, I say sure, go ahead. So now, let's actually get started with the thing everyone wanted me to talk about. The Zyuranger game. Yeah, there's another Super Sentai game. So, quick summary of Zyuranger. On the nearby planet, yeah, it's weird. Not sure why they said that, but it doesn't really matter. Astronauts notice a container on the surface. When they go to open it, it unleashes the witch Pandora, who begins creating havoc after she was sealed away because of destroying dinosaurs and just causing harm in general. So a wise old man calls forth heroes embedded with the powers of dinosaurs to defeat her and her putties. I hope you noticed that's just Power Rangers, right? Yeah, get used to that. Power Rangers has this thing where it will just sometimes just copy the plot line of the Sentai. Not always wholesale, but at least the concepts and ideas of it. Which, to note, is not inherently an issue. It's more how it's executed and how it's presented. And overall, I have to give Power Rangers props here because it did it better overall than Zyuranger. This is just more because I overall like the characters more in Power Rangers than in the Super Sentai version, which is kind of sad as even here the Power Ranger characters aren't better, they're just more defined and more interesting, but hey, they did better than the Sentai, and it won't be the last time it happens either. But in any case, let's talk about the Zyuranger game. It's bad. Like, the type of bad I can't stand after a while. On the first stage, I had to use cheat codes just to get to the other levels, and they do not improve. They're just annoying and just... I can't deal with them, they're just boring. I never said I would beat them, I just said I would cover them. And you don't need to beat a game to review it. I mean, like, you need to get a good chunk in, but what that chunk is, it's dependent on the person. But point is, this game's bad. Now, finally, we can get to talking about the Power Ranger games. Which, there are a lot of them, so I'll try to get quickly through them as best I can. So I'll start with the Sega Genesis game, since I actually grew up playing that game. Which is kinda of a fighting game, sorta. Basically, the arcade mode is 4 fights. Yes, seriously. And some Megazord fights. The thing is about this is that it's semi-competent, but not enough to be worth your time. Let me elaborate. The game is not really well designed, like the fights are terribly balanced, like freaking Goldar is too powerful in general, and fights themselves are just annoying and frustrating because all of the Rangers play the same, and only have a few moves that make them really any different, which isn't really good enough. This game is barely passable, and I say barely passable. It's only brought up because it looks nice, the music's pretty decent, and that's it. Next, we have the Super Nintendo, another game that's actually pretty good. Surprisingly, I heard it was good, and yeah, I thought it would be more mediocre, but all honesty here, it's just good. Like, it's not something I would play on my own time, but for what it's worth, it's actually pretty decent. It's mostly a beat 'em up, but only on one plane. And it feels competent enough on what it's trying to do with nothing really particularly wrong. I would also like to mention something weird here, is that all the sprite work in this game is really fluid. Like, a little too fluid, like I was a little surprised on how fluid it was. Because that's not normal for this time. But another time perhaps. Next we have the Game Boy game, and I just quickly put it down, I didn't even bother with it too much. Because it was just bullshit, like seriously. The controls are a little lacking, and thus it always made me delay, so whenever I tried to do it, it just felt wrong. And then it's just like, and it's mostly like the Super Nintendo game, but with more annoyances. It would have been fine, but eh. And finally, we have the Game Gear game, which no one talks about for some reason, even though I think out of all 4 of them, it's actually the best. Yeah, seriously. The game tries to be a combination of the Super Nintendo version and the Genesis, with the Genesis more like fighting aspect, with more of the feel of the Super Nintendo game. And it works really well. All the characters play a little differently, their combos are a little different, and their movesets are pretty interesting. So it's actually worth playing to me. It's like, wow, this is what the Genesis game should have been. I also forgot to talk about the Sega CD game. And I have talked about the Sega CD game. It is an FMV game that doesn't really require you to do anything. It's just there. I'm not going to talk about it. It's there. Now, after this point in time in the games, this is where we need to talk about Zoo 2. Zoo 2 is where basically the series kept on going long after it ran out of footage, which they were somehow able to actually get Toei to make them new footage for them, which is so bizarre nowadays because of just how much time and effort would just take just to do that. Plus, budgetary issues were always a thing, so it's also more surprising. We'll talk about that budget more in a bit. And the reason was simple, they wanted to keep using the suit. And personally speaking, I am of 2 minds. While I understand the point of why you want to keep the suit for branding purposes and just to keep people more invested, because some people just don't like new suits in general and some kids would just prefer them just to be the same. Plus, the next Sentai, Die Ranger, was so radically different from Zoo Ranger, it would have been a hard sell. Plus, also trying to balance in the footage would have been a little harder due to because of the different fighting style, but another time. But I also see the benefit of just changing it up so that the show doesn't get stale, new storylines can be introduced, allowing the show to grow and grab different audiences. So there's more to it. My point being, this will have a knock-on effect. I would like to also mention around this time, the show got better, but not in the ways you think it would. The cast was more able to more naturally say their dialogue, even if it's a bit bad. It's just overall slightly better, which makes it way more tolerable to me. I think it also helps that they were more easily adapting the plots from Die Ranger this season, which we'll talk about in a moment. They basically made sure that the storyline could work better with the material, and let me just tell ya, it works way better. Plus, it helps to be adapted from one of the better Sentai, that being Die Ranger. Let me get this out of the way. I love Die Ranger. It's a good series in overall with a solid cast, good villain group, awesome action. Seriously, this season was awesome. Just all the action was just amazing. Only real issue I ever had with the show was the Kiba Ranger, or for us, the White Tiger Ranger, which was honestly the only thing they ever added into the show from Die Ranger, plus the mechs. But seriously, Die Ranger is a great start. If you want to start Sentai, I recommend it. It's a really good start, and I just feel like it's a great series. Go watch it. Now back to our feature presentation. Season 2 was also around the same time where the main crew was changed out a bit. Yeah, for those who don't know, Power Rangers is a non-union group. For simplicity's sake, I'm just gonna say, basically it meant Saban could make the Ranger actors do more work for less pay, even though the show was doing very well, and I cannot stress this, very well. There is a lot of hearsay around this, so I'm going to just basically say what essentially happened and leave those who do know more to say more on this matter. Essentially, the actors for Red, Black, and Yellow wanted a bigger pay, due to, again, the show's popularity, and Saban said no, and they left. Which basically meant they have to be replaced really quickly, and let me tell ya, the change was not handled well. However, we did get Johnny on Bosch out of this, who, this show was his big break, and soon transitioned over to do voice stuff in anime and game. Heck, this is something I learned recently through a friend of mine. Do you know Bryan Cranston's actor? Yeah, the Breaking Bad guy. Actually did some voice work for the show for a while for Monsters of the Week. Yeah, I didn't know that either. That's kinda cool. And I do want to mention this because of some other stuff, but I'm saying this because it's just how it is. I need to mention that a lot of times the actors in this show sadly do not get the chance to go out and do more. Some called it the Ranger Curse, where basically once you've done the show, you're basically done. You can't do anything else, and the ones who luckily do get able to do something more after this are just lucky. Heck, one of the bigger actors who actually went on to do more stuff was Amy Jo Johnson, the Pink Ranger, who I actually knew before I ever saw Power Rangers, or at least her particular Power Rangers, this one. That being from Flashpoint because I watched it with my mom. Yeah, my history with series are always weird. I'm just saying, it's sad they couldn't get more work after a while, and some just couldn't do it anymore, because they didn't get enough money from this show that was, again, doing very well, and just wasn't paying them enough to keep doing it. This is why I keep saying unions are a good thing. I know I never said it before ever, but here we go, we're starting that now. Unions are a good thing. Though that's not to say that the actors didn't have a good, fulfilling life. I mean, a lot of the actors actually went on to do good things. Like, for example, Skull's actor became a teacher. Oh, yeah, right. Let's actually talk about this right now. You might have noticed that I didn't talk about Bulk and Skull. That's mostly because I find them funny on occasion. For the most part, while I think they're funny, they do take away from the main plot, which could have been more serviced by their other removal or just assisting in that plot, which they rarely do, and when they do, it is actually interesting. I don't dislike them, it's just that they're there, and I'm like, whatever. Because trust me, there are worse versions of them later on. I also want to add that there was this really cool interview between both Bulk and Skull's actors that was really well done and really did get some insight into how it worked, and I think you should watch it. I'm sorry for going on a little too long, so let's actually begin talking about the games for this season. Well, sort of. Because you see, the series also got a movie, which is, like, it's not important. Like, this movie is super non-canon. Like, the only reason why I'm mentioning them is because of the tie-in games, nothing more. And really, talking about them isn't really that interesting. There's the Game Gear version, which is just the OG Game Gear again, just reworked and changed to reflect the current cast. That's really it. Still overall good and fine. Goldar's still awful. Why is he so hard? Then we have the Super Nintendo game, which is mostly like the Super Nintendo game, but it's harder, which got it really annoying. There's also this stage flip thing where you can flip side to side of a stage, and it's like, it's interesting, but at the same time, it's like, I would argue it's fine if the health bar was a little extended, but because you can only take 5 hits before you're dead, it gets really annoying really fast. Next we have the Genesis game. The Genesis game is a beat 'em up with a time limit. Yes, a time limit. That thing makes this game very bad. Basically, it forces you to really quickly get through the game, and it's like, why? Because for the most part, it doesn't really make it any more enjoyable, it just makes it frustrating, and it's just, why? If it was removed, this game would just be fine. Like, I would say it's okay, maybe try it if you want to, but the time limit just makes it annoying. It basically makes it from an okay game to a just And lastly, we have the Game Boy game. It's ironically a copy of the OG Super Nintendo game. That's fine, except for one part that's bullshit, since you have to do a sequence of attacks where in a particular pattern or else you die. Like, it is literally the only bullshit part about this game. The rest of it is actually pretty decently easy. It's like, why? And that's sad because, again, it's fine. Just fine. This was also around the same time where they decided to change the Sentai again, and this one being to Kaku Ranger, the Ninja Sentai. which was okay, decent, but overall forgettable in some regard. And most people only remember it because of this line that has become a meme to my friends. I'm not going to give you context to it, because that would ruin the fun. And I do want to stress, this series is fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but otherwise, forgettable. And the same can be said with Season 3 of Power Rangers. Mostly forgettable, and the only thing that makes it slightly better on how it leads into Zero, which we'll talk about next, right after we talk about the fighting game. Because yes, it actually got one, and I only mention it here because of where it fits into the timeline. Fighting games are hard to judge on their own because it requires a lot of time investment just to see if you actually like the game, or even to tell if it's good or not because of how they can work. And they can change over time due to updates, character rosters, and so on and so forth. But if it's bad, you can easily tell, and this game is at least, my guess is that it's decent. It's mostly because it feels fine enough, feels responsive, feels like there's a lot of moves here. At least there's that. Not too complicated, but there's at least some level there. I didn't entirely understand all the mechanics, but it doesn't really matter in the end. But in any case, after this game would come Zeo, where the series finally got to be pushed out to being really good, or at least better than it has been before, and finally begin the chance to actually change out suits. Which, in fact, if anything, Zeo is better than O-Ranger, though in the Sentai's defense, it wasn't its own fault. Let me quickly explain the plot of O-Ranger, the Sentai. It was originally going to be a darker overall plot, with the arrival of the Machine Empire coming back after thousands of years ago, failing to conquer some ancient civilization that actually birthed them, and the only thing that's able to stop them is the O-Ranger, using the ancient power of that old civilization that created them. It was going to be a wartime plot, and it would have been interesting, but some problems began to happen. There was some terrorism that basically shocked a lot of people and hurt a lot of people, plus earthquakes were happening around the same time, causing a lot of problems. So Toei, in their defense, chose to try to make it more lighthearted. But the problem is that by the time they tried to change it, it was already too late. The vibe has been asserted and now it's being changed so dramatically, it's whiplash. And due to the writers not being able to properly balance this, it became a mess. Not without merit, and there are some great episodes. It just wasn't enough to make the show worthwhile in its entirety. And I mean, it wasn't helped when a child character is super important to the plot and then messes stuff up because reasons, and the writers choosing to just keep her around even though she does nothing for the plot other than make it happen. Seriously. Don't make children actors important unless you can make them act good and are not annoying. But let's actually begin talking about Zeo's game. Zeo actually got 3 of them. Well, I say 3 games, but it's a little more complicated than that. One of them is very bizarre. One is just a racing game, and one is just pinball. Let's talk about this weird oddity of a game. It's basically like one of those ad games where basically it's not good, it's mostly there just to promote the product, like those old Captain Crunch games, which I actually played because when you didn't have a lot of games, you gotta do what you gotta do. And let me tell ya, this is not worth it. It's really not. Like, the only thing worth watching this for is some of the bad voice acting, and it's hilarious. Really, this game is just not worth your time. I couldn't even get that thing to work on my PC, and I've been able to get a lot of things to work on this thing. But for whatever reason, I cannot get this thing to run. Though the best I could do is just tell you what it's about. Basically, Machine Empire came in, stole the Zeo crystals, you gotta reclaim them. Because that makes sense. But whatever. It's a platformer all about getting the stones so that you can fight the boss, and that's it. It's a platformer, it's garbage, the key layout seems to be garbage as well from everything I saw. Literally, controls are WSLD. You know what you use for attack? Oh, not your mouse or any other key. It's actually the keys literally right under them. That's a bad design right there. I honest to goodness do not know why they made this. Literally going on about this game more, it's just gonna hurt my sanity, and why bother? Anyway, let's talk about the racing game, and it's okay? I'm more confused about its existence, since it exists in this weird point where it's before Turbo, so I thought they would have at least made another copy of this game with all the other Turbo characters, but no? Whatever. It doesn't really matter. In any case, the game has a roster of 8 characters, not that impressive, but one of the weirder aspects about this game is that it has a review mirror? Even though you don't need to worry about that, like, ever? Also, gear shiftings in this game. I'm a little confused because I don't think a lot of kart racers ever bother with, gear shifting. It's not bad, but really, I can't go on more about it. It's just Zeo Rangers racing. That's it. There's nothing more to it. It's just that. There's also drifting, but I think that was in other games too, but I can't be for certain. Racing games are not my forte. And finally, pinball. And that's enough about pinball. Look, what do you want me to say? It's literally just pinball. I could waste my time doing it, but I won't. It's pinball. There's a lot of them, at least. I just couldn't care less. It's pinball. So after Zeo, they decided to kick it into Turbo. Okay, look, Turbo is a weird series in general. And that's mostly because it's based on a weird Sentai, Car Ranger. Like, it's been a while since I actually watched Car Ranger, and for this review, I did watch a few more episodes of it. And holy crap, did I forget a lot of stuff about Car Ranger. Literally, if you have never seen Car Ranger, go watch like the first episode, and let me just tell you, your mind will be like, what the because it's a weird Sentai. A lot of people say that this Sentai is actually also a parody of Super Sentai in general. I wouldn't say that it isn't, but it's never been officially confirmed by, Toei themselves. I mean, most certainly it plays around with the ideas of Super Sentai in general, but it's really not a parody. It's too serious at times to be a parody, in my opinion. But that's not to say it's bad, like, I'm just saying it's weird, and it's just not the type of weird I'm into, for the record. I mean, like, no joke, it literally has a weird, really weird innuendo in the first few minutes, and it's weird. Though I do want to talk about the name and a bunch of other stuff about Car Ranger as well, since we might as well. I'm never going to talk about this again, so why not? The Car Ranger name is actually a bit funny because the original Turbo Ranger, no, not that one, Turbo Ranger for the Sentai was actually originally going to be called Car Ranger, but it got changed. And Car Ranger here is just known as Turbo, which is just funny in my mind. You now might be wondering, hey, why haven't I actually explained the plot of Car Ranger? Okay, strap in folks, this is weird. Car Ranger's plot follows Nappu after his homeworld got destroyed by the Buzzlot. However, there are legends of heroes born under the constellations of the Cars. Yes, seriously, Cars. And randomly chooses 5 people to become, well, the Car Rangers. Who then kind of reject it, and instead of doing it for world peace and all that junk, they do it for the simple idea of traffic safety. Yes, seriously. This Sentai was weird. Power Rangers Turbo is also a comedy series, but it's somehow better and worse. Like, when it leans into the Sentai too much, it hurts. And when I say it hurts, I mean it hurts. When it's a lot more original with its comedy, it's actually a little better. Heck, doing some of the Sentai plot points a little better at times. This is also the season where they tried to add a child actor into the crew to compete with themselves. Yeah, let me elaborate. You see, Saban was also trying to push up other Toku series they were adapting, even if they didn't do it all that well, like VR Trooper, the awful Mask Rider that to this day is again rumored to be hated by Ishinomori himself. They were also adapting the Fighter Kabuto, because that show got adapted into Big Bad Beetleborg, which sometimes was actually doing better than Power Ranger. Yeah, it got super popular. And it did well enough until it ended. Why? They ran out of footage. And the next series got super childish, like, wow. To the point where it got canned quickly on, so Saban had to end the show with no new footage. There's also a weird irony in it all. You see, for those who don't know, Beat Fighter Kabuto is a part of the Metal Hero series, and would actually, because of the show's cancellation, and something had to run with Super Sentai, they decided to revive Kamen Rider Kuga to run with it. And I'm really glad that happened. I mean, the Metal Hero series was pretty good in and of itself. It's just, sad that that series had to go too. I mean, like, just to mention Metal Heroes for a moment, I was also planning on maybe adding in some Metal Hero games, but I decided against it because, look, I'm already talking about Super Sentai games. If I talk about Metal Hero stuff, it's already gonna go too long. You might be now wondering, hey, why haven't I actually elaborated on Turbo's plot? Well, Turbo's plot is just pretty much a continuation of what happened last time, and there was also the movie, which is just bad. Like, don't watch it. It's not worth your time or energy to watch. And in any case, let's actually elaborate on the plot of, well, Turbo. Turbo's villain this time is someone named Tatsuka, who's after and conquering Earth for some reason. That is it. That is the plot. Not much else to it. Oh yeah, this is something else I'm gonna have to mention because I'm gonna have to mention it next time. This was also the season where they decided to more change the villain's minion group to, instead of these guys, into these guys. Which I understand entirely. Sometimes the villain's minions just look dumb. They just do. So I can understand their reasons for doing so. But in any case, that's the plot. That's all you need to know. Let's actually talk about the games. Turbo didn't get any games, but Car Ranger did. And they are some weird ones here. Because we have to talk about the Sega Pico. Yes, seriously, the Sega Pico. It was a console made by Sega to be an edutainment thing. And it was interesting, for the most part. I honestly would have emulated it if I could, but the problem was, I just couldn't find an emulator and a ROM. I later on, during the editing of this, found an emulator for the Pico, but I couldn't find any site that had the ROM. So, sorry on that end, we're gonna just have to rely on video. Which is really sad because there's a Pokemon Sega Pico. Yes, Pokemon on official Sega hardware. Which, yes, I know it's based on the anime, but still. Next we have the Super Nintendo game. And let me tell you, it's pretty alright. Not bad, but not worth your time. It's pretty much like the Super Nintendo game for the OG Power Ranger game, but it's just different. It's overall fine, and I don't see any issues with it, but it feels fine. But it does let me punch Elgar. Seriously, Elgar was the worst in Turbo. Like, every time he was on screen, he was just the most annoying. Seriously. It's not bad, but I would recommend playing something else in your own time. It's not bad, but I wouldn't put it up there. You know what I mean? Sadly, we didn't get any games for both In Space and Lost Galaxy. So let's go through it real quickly. In Space was going to be the last season of Power Rangers, which is kind of interesting. Basically, it allowed them to try to finally have some resolution, and basically allowed for a lot more character moments to be more important, and it just feels so much better. Like, serious talk here, a lot of Zordon era stuff has a hard time connecting for me, because it has a hard time trying to make me care about the cast, when it's just so by the numbers that it becomes dull, and more waiting for something to actually matter. Again, to note, it's not that it isn't well presented at times, it just, the stories they tell are basic, and nothing more to chew on. In any case, before In Space, the Turbo team got defeated, and were forced into space, as they find the remnant of a ship that Zordon left behind. But with the help of Andros, not sure why I can remember his name but not the other guy. It really does actually annoy me, but in any case. With his help, they become the Space Ranger. Minus the child actor, but in any case. As they try to defeat Dark Spectre and his minions of evil. Mega Ranger, the Sentai, was a school Sentai kinda like old Power Rangers, except, with a lot more cooler stories in my opinion, that add to a lot to the characters and their flaws. With also being the start of Yasuko Kobayashi, who we will need to mention later on, and was also the writer of the next Sentai, Gingaman, but in a moment. In my opinion, it was a great Sentai. Good characters, interesting plots and ideas. It actually did a good idea of the Evil Ranger, which sadly a lot of later series wouldn't do, Power Rangers or Super Sentai. Both of these seasons are just great. I recommend them, they're good, and just well done. I said Mega Ranger didn't get a game, though that's a lie too. It had one for the Sega Pico, but, again, not worth mentioning. Sadly, I'm gonna have to do this a lot of times because in the middle of this video, this is why it's 3 parts, there's going to be a lot of nothing. Sadly. I honestly thought there would be more games, but no, there isn't really. Next, let's talk about Gingaman, a forest Sentai that was about the protectors of a sacred forest defending it against space pirates. Yeah, and it was pretty okay. Like, it's good, but I can say that the idea was interesting, but just bleh. Lost Galaxy was after the good vibe wave destroyed a lot of evil. Earth decided to expand into space and make space colonies. And while on one of their expeditions, they find a planet trying to be conquered by Insector, who is after conquering a planet, tries to take the Quasar Sabers, but only the heroes are able to take them and become the Galaxy Rangers. Both of the series are fine, while I'm actually more impressed that Lost Galaxy was as good as it was, with not a lot of pre-planning before it, since they legit didn't know there was going to be another season until way later, and they had to rush it a bit. Certain ideas and concepts were just dropped, and the Lost Galaxy is barely a footnote. Like, honestly, they're about the same in quality in my mind. They're not bad, but, they're there. They're like a solid C+. And finally, we have Lightspeed Rescue, which had a lot of games. 3 of them, in fact. I'm not sure why it got 3 of them, but you know what? Whatever. Sadly, there was no game for Go-Go 5, which was a family Sentai. Basically, everyone in it were related, which actually adds some different dynamics and ideas and potential in it, which I actually think they did it really well. So, the plot is basically this. The family really was into rescue. Basically, they were rescue services, to cops, to firefighters, paramedics, so on and so forth. So you think they would handle monsters of natural disasters sort of thing, right? Nope, just demons. Why? Just because. Not saying it was a bad thing, it's just a weird choice in general. So what is the plot? Basically, the father disappeared for a while after learning that the demons were coming back, so decided to make the Go-Go 5. A really simple plot in general. Lightspeed Rescue is basically the same concept, except none of the characters are related, except the commander and his 2 kids, which the other one became the Titanium Ranger, which was actually a fully original Ranger, which was actually pretty cool and well done. I'm not a fan of creating whole new cell Rangers in general, but it's at least done well enough where I can say, I'm cool with it. Plus with the storylines they did, it was actually pretty decent. You might be wondering why I don't have a lot of things to say about this show. Well, it's a pretty fine show. It's a very B- show for me. Like, it's overall still good. It just doesn't make me say I love it. Enough to say it's in my top 10, but not enough to make it say, I say it's a good in-between season between a good series and a mediocre one. And to note, I am talking about both series here, since in my opinion, they're about the same in quality. Though I think Go-Go 5 does better because Vipra's actor was just terrible. Seriously, she couldn't act out of a paper bag, what the hell? But let's talk about the Lightspeed Rescue games. I originally thought I wouldn't need to talk about the PS1 game, because I thought it would be the same one as the N64 one, but no, it's an entirely different game in general. It's a 3D beat-em-up game that exists and it's a little annoying. Mostly because it's kinda dull, and then again it's a really short game, like 2 to 3 hours if you know what you're doing, and really, it's not worth your time. Basically, it's just going through some levels while playing as the Rangers, though weirdly enough, you can't switch Rangers after every level, for some reason. I'm not sure why. I wanted to play as the other Rangers, but I couldn't. And really weirdly enough, you can't even get the final level unless you collect secret items in the game that the game doesn't even tell you about. It also runs weirdly, like, at sometimes it runs fine enough, but then sometimes it'll run slowly, and it's just like, what the heck? Plus, certain levels act odd, so I wasn't able to do some right. Overall, it's a boring game that exists, and it's not worth your time. Maybe if you feel like it, but I wouldn't recommend it. And next we have the Game Boy game, which is actually kinda interesting. In this one, the game has 3 modes, though technically 2 of them are similar but just have different goals. But let me elaborate. There are basically 6 stages in the game, but there are 3 individual ones set in those levels. The first one is about rescuing people. However, it takes a sort of Metroidvania-esque level design where basically you need tools to not only save them, but to even reach them. Which is interesting enough, and I thought it was a cool idea. The time limit I'm a bit against because I just don't like time limits in general, and I feel it's a little too strict, but that is just my opinion. I think it's overall fine even with it. The next one is just a battle one where you're fighting foes, and it's overall okay, not bad, but it's just mostly fighting enemies. That's it. And finally, the Megazord fight, where basically, remember all the way back where I mentioned how Jetman's battles were weird? They ironically play the same, like literally not much of a difference. Weird how that comes back around. And finally, we have the N64 version, which some people say it's the worst Power Ranger game. I'm like, eh. Like, it's bad, but it's not like god-awful. Like, I played too many bad games. This ain't one of them. It's mostly like the PS1 game, where basically, it's mostly painfully mediocre. Like, there's nothing entirely on principle wrong with it, but there's nothing really good about it. It's just there. In any case, the game is a mission-based game where basically you need to do, or for the most part, rescue people, get a thing, do it. That's it. There's nothing more really to it. You can ignore enemies for the most part, so why even do anything? And thus it kinda just becomes a dull experience, like the PS1 game. And really, both of them are just not worth your time. Like, seriously, the Game Boy game's actually interesting. Like, go play that. Oh boy. 18 games, people. 18 individual games. And we're not done yet. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I thought it would be fun to talk about all the Power Ranger games, and all the thoughts and feelings on the show, and Super Sentai as well. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time. Though next time will not be the Power Ranger games part 2, that will be Wanted Dead. Why are we talking about it? Well, I want to talk about it. Next time, when we do this series, we'll begin talking about the games from Time Force all the way to RPM. Well, technically RPM didn't get a game, it got a Sega Pico with Go Onger, but just next time, okay?